The Imperial Japanese Navy, which placed a special focus on aircraft carriers, launched the Pacific War with 10 aircraft carriers. Japanese pilots took advantage of the ace maker until the Americans unleashed a forgotten warrior who would shift the tides as the battle raged on. Which of the two lethal aircraft would prevail in a deadly encounter that would decide the Pacific's future? The Hellcat F-6F. On October 22, 1944, at the crack of dawn, Lieutenant Roy W. Rushing and U.S. Navy Commander David McCampbell departed off the carrier Essex. A group of 60 Japanese fighters and dive bombers were only 22 miles away and closing quickly. They had launched attacks on the American Carrier Task Group from the bases in the Philippines. McCampbell shot down 9 Japanese aircraft in a matter of minutes. Rushing now had a total of 6. This occurred at the opening of the renowned Battle of Leyte Gulf. However, he wasn't scheduled to fly that morning, but since he was the air wing commander, he nonetheless took flight. While he and Rushing engaged the approaching fighters, he dispatched 5 additional patrolling fighters to snare the bombers. It continues to be an accomplishment that's unparalleled in the history of U.S. Navy fighter aircraft, and it's up there among the greatest fighter actions ever. Although McCampbell was an excellent flyer, the story involved more than just the pilots. The Grumman F-6F Hellcat, the fighter McCampbell and Rushing flew, ended up being America's best ace maker. The F-6F Hellcat, one of the best fighters of World War II, was developed by Grumman and went from experimental to operational in less than 18 months. The second prototype's engine was changed from the 1,700 horsepower Wright R2600-10 to the more potent 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney R-2800-10. The XF-6F-3 completed its first flight 1 month later, and a contract for mass production appeared immediately. The Hellcat was adored by its pilots because it adhered to Grumman's design concept of producing an aircraft in which a pilot could become proficient in a short amount of time. It was easy to operate from a carrier. It could outperform the enemy as well. Given the extremely rapid time frame from design to manufacturing, the Hellcat placed first in the majority of categories, putting it among the best fighters of the war. 75% of the Navy's aerial wins during the war were owed to Hellcat pilots, who downed 5,156 enemy aircraft in just 2 years, with a remarkable 13-to-1 kill ratio. Ironically, this legendary fighter jet was largely ignored. The F-6F was designed to be an enhanced version of another tough American fighter, the F-4F Wildcat, which had certain drawbacks when facing the Zero. However, it wasn't until the F-4U Crosshair, the Wildcat's replacement, ran into development issues that the Hellcat was created. Based on the F-4F design, Grumman created the strongly armored Hellcat with the new landing gear, significantly larger wings, a larger engine, and a larger propeller. The brand new fighter. By the end of the war, Grumman had produced 12,275 planes. The Hellcat was also reasonably simple to land aboard a carrier, which was important for a naval fighter. This was made possible by the huge wing, which enabled it to outturn a Bf-109, and the strategically positioned cockpit, which was elevated over the main fuel tank, illustrates why it had a considerably lower rate of landing accidents than aircraft like the Corsair or Seafire, whose pilots were fortunately positioned so that they could see the ship on final call. As a fighter, the Hellcat's major rival was the above-mentioned Zero, which it outperformed in terms of speed, firearms, and armor. A balance of bullet mass and rate of fire was achieved by the majority of Hellcat's 6 0.50 caliber machine guns, each of which had 400 rounds. It also had the benefit of streamlining the logistical chain, making it a more elegant option than the combination of small caliber guns and large caliber cannons employed by many European aircraft. The Hellcat proved to be a fighter's dream in almost every way. McCampbell and Rushing were able to make history thanks to its versatile nature. This was McCampbell's second time receiving the honor. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea on June 19th of 1944, referred to as the Marianas Turkey Shoot, the ace had previously shot down 7 Japanese planes. But McCampbell would soon find out that something was off with his aircraft. McCampbell saw the main tank was just half full as he and Rushing hurried into the air. He kept taking out enemy planes until he realized his Hellcat fuel tanks were nearly empty and that he might not make it back to the aircraft carrier. Indeed, McCampbell was able to land his Hellcat back on the Essex, but air crews were unable to move the plane because the tanks were completely bare. Even worse, they discovered that he only had 6 bullets left in his machine guns, and they were all stuck. McCampbell, who passed away in 1996, was awarded the Medal of Honor for his actions that day, while Rushing, who passed away in 1986, was awarded the Navy Cross. McCampbell, who's still regarded as the greatest fighter ace in the U.S. Navy history, also received 3 Distinguished Flying Crosses, the Silver Star, the Legion of Merit, and the Navy Cross. He was the 3rd highest scoring American ace with 34 aerial victories, but the highest scoring American fighter pilot to survive the war. The Zero A6M. In In a close-range duel against a skilled Japanese pilot flying a Mitsubishi A6M0 during World War II, few American fighter pilots on their own survived. American pilots gained the upper hand, again mainly due to innovative strategies developed by the U.S. commander John S. Jimmy Thatch in 1942. Although the Zero remained a dangerous foe until the war was over. Zero, referred to as the Mitsubishi A6M or Navy Type Zero, is a single-seat, low-wing monoplane that the Japanese used to great effect during World War II. It was the first carrier-based fighter that could defeat opponents on land, designed by Horikoshi Jiro. It was created to specifications laid down in 1937 and put through its first test in 1939, and then put into production and use in China in 1940. Its Zero designation comes from the fact that its very first year of manufacturing, 1940, was the 2600th anniversary of the famed first emperor of Japan, Jimmu, taking the throne. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries produced the Zero, which was initially powered by Nakajima Sake radial air-cooled engine with 14 cylinders, 2 staggered even rows of 7, and 1,020 horsepower. Later it turned into a 3-blade constant-speed propeller using a 1,130 horsepower engine. It could carry 2 132-pound bombs under the wings, and it reached a top speed of 350 miles per hour at a height of over 20,000 feet. It was armed with 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons. The Zero, when it first appeared, could outmaneuver any other aircraft. In addition, Zero's 156-gallon internal fuel tank was supplemented with a 94-gallon external tank that could be dropped when empty, extending the aircraft's range considerably. It wasn't until 1943 that the Allies had fighters on the field that could defeat it in aerial combat. In the latter months of the war, many Zeros were converted into kamikaze aircraft. Nearly 10,430 of them were constructed in all. So, who dominated the Pacific War? Didn't take much to take down the Zero, as it had given up armor in exchange for maneuverability. On October 5th of 1943, above Wake Island, the Zero and the Hellcat engaged in their first dogfight. 48 Hellcats engaged 23 Japanese fighters in a one-sided battle, shooting down 16 of them while losing none of their own. When the First War began, not having this protective gear was less expensive and even helped the Zero become more agile in battle. However, American tactics and technology quickly advanced, and the Japanese finally lost many pilots who were flying Zeros without this armor. Self-sealing fuel tanks took the Japanese a while to build and use, but they eventually did so later in the conflict. It was due to several variables, including an intensive and pervasive focus on offensive operations caused by strategic necessity and cultural predisposition, that they didn't start the war with self-sealing tanks and armor plates to protect the pilot. The Japanese Navy units engaged in endless combat until pilots lost their lives, suffered injuries, or gave up due to exhaustion. The Veteran Pilot Corps of Japan, which carried the brunt of the war, fell into a death spiral as a result. Despite being outnumbered, the dogfight was entirely below 12,000 feet, where the Zero performed at its best. Even in these fortunate conditions, though, the Hellcat still vastly excelled over the Japanese premier aircraft. The Hellcat had just proven that would have been obvious for quite some time by establishing itself as the new monarch of the skies and the dominant aircraft in the Pacific War. So, drop down your thoughts on this savage fight between the 2 deadly fighter aircraft of the Pacific War. Oh yeah, in the comment section below, in case, you didn't know where to put your thoughts on a YouTube video. Thought maybe you hadn't used YouTube before, it's a possibility.